The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody. We want to welcome you to our webinar this morning. We're going to talk about NAV in the cloud and what that means for your business. We are so excited. We're going to have Tony Lessard presenting for us this morning, and I can't wait to hear his presentation. Just a reminder to all of our attendees, if you have any questions at any point, feel free to type them into the question box. I will call them out, get them answered for you. Without further ado, Tony, I will hand it over to you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Abby. Everybody hearing me okay?
Sound great, Tony. Thanks.
Abby, you're good?
Yep.
Okay.
Sounds great.
All right. All right. I appreciate everybody's time, taking the time to view this webinar this morning. Again, like Abby said, we're going to be talking about moving NAV to the cloud, what the options are, what the kind of best practices are, things to look at before you make that choice, pros and cons of NAV in the cloud, and what it all means, basically. So start out with kind of an introduction to ABC Computers. ABC Computers has been around about 30 years now. Started out as, kind of an IT services firm, just doing, break-fix things, people's, servers and workstations having issues. We come in and help out with those issues. Added some accounting packages over the years, and finally have settled on Dynamics NAV, which we've been working with for years now. So we've been in business, like I said, 30 years or so. We've got 52 team members right now, 4 main locations, and a lot of satellite offices here where people are working from home, doing remote support, things like that. So a couple of our clients here. This is just kind of a small list, a small sampling. We've got others as well here, but these are some of the ones that you may have seen. Like Bulldog Battery is one, Culver's. Everybody in the Wisconsin area knows about Culver's. Lids, cat plugs, fishing lures, MEPS fishing lures, Mr. Twister, Shep's Ice Cream, and Saris, which makes bike racks and bike accessories, things like that. So we help a lot of these businesses kind of leverage technology to become more productive, more profitable. That's kind of what everybody wants. So again, this is just a small sampling of them, but there's a lot of different companies that we work with, a lot of different industries, a lot of different types of companies. So it's really interesting from my perspective. So moving on, these are the panels that we're going to be, or the panelists we're going to have on the call today. Myself, I'm Tony Lessard. I'm at the bottom there. I've been with ABC about 9 years now, going on 10 years. Worked in the IT field and the consulting field here for about 15 years. Also, I'm not sure if Ben is joining the call. Ben actually had to travel today, so he may not be on the call. Ben has been with ABC for about 11 years. He's a technology architect here. He's had about 20 years of experience in technology consulting field as well. And finally, Chad Williams is the lead of our development department. So getting in there and coding with NAV, working with the developers that write the code and keep things running smoothly in NAV. So Chad's been here roughly 11 years, and again, he leads up that development department. Right, so jumping into things, I'm sure we've all heard of the cloud, right? And I don't want to go into too much detail and bore you guys, but basically the cloud, just to kind of oversimplify things, what we're looking at with the cloud, it's just, all it is the term, just a generic term for the environment where your workloads are running. So where your data sits, where your computers are, where your servers are, where your databases are. And really, if you think of it that way, then you can kind of think of it as you've got an on-premise cloud, right, which is just your data center, where your servers are, your network equipment, everything. Sorry about that. So all your data running locally. And so you can start to think about how to manage the things locally, how the data runs. Sorry, one second here. Okay, sorry about that. So you've got your private cloud, which is your data center. Then you've got the public cloud. And the public cloud doesn't necessarily mean your data is open to the public. It's just that it runs in a publicly accessible location. So we're a Microsoft shop. Microsoft Azure is our preferred solution because we're Dynamics NAV partner. Microsoft is really developing their hosting to kind of fit right in with NAV. So Microsoft Azure is the main one we'll be talking about today. There's other ones, of course, out there: Amazon, Google, Rackspace. There's a plethora. There's small providers in your local area. There's all kinds of them. So, I know I'm not telling you anything that you probably don't already know, but why is the cloud important? And it's not necessarily the cloud that's important, but it's really the data and access to the data that's important. So as computing kind of started, it was you had maybe a like a main PC out there, main server, and then you'd have your your thin clients. You might have your your main application running in one big data center on one big server. That server is ultra critical. If that server has any issues, you are in a bad spot. So as we've kind of grown in the computing world, we've come to realize that you can't really have the dependencies on the hardware. That it has to be about the data and access to the data. So what that means is basically you don't want to have it tied to a host operating system like Windows, where you've got to patch it, you've got to run Windows updates, you can get a virus infection. There's all kinds of things that can happen to a single server that can cause you to not have access to your data. So that means you have to start designing applications that are mobile, that can transition from server to server and still function the exact same. So you can do this on-premise. You can do it in a public cloud. Either way, the concepts are the same. The software has to be able to move around, has to be resilient, and move from hardware to hardware. So when you start thinking about the data not being tied to a server, you can start thinking about your other infrastructure and making that more robust. So you can think about having multiple physical host servers in a virtual environment, and you can make those host servers redundant for each other. So your virtual servers can pass back and forth between these hardware servers, that if a hardware server goes down, your virtual servers can move to the other server and keep running. You can start to spread the load software-wise across different virtual servers as well. So there's a middle tier in NAV. That middle tier can be load balanced. So you can have it running on a couple of different servers. You can have that middle tier access the same data on the back end, but be running on two different servers on the front end. So if one of those servers has an issue, you can fail over to the second server. So you can start to think of making it more robust, more resilient, so you get rid of those single points of failure that are critical, that can take everything down. Another thing that you start to think about is scale. And so if you have a rush, if you have a large volume of requests, say you have a website or something like that, and Black Friday comes and all of a sudden you need 20 servers, web servers, to handle that load. if you're trying to do that on premise, you have to start spinning up 20 virtual servers or 20 physical servers, and it just becomes a nightmare trying to keep up. And there's examples of that. Recently, very recently, actually, the last couple of weeks, Target Corporation. And I'm not, anyone that knows me knows I'm not a fashion guy, but this was on the news recently, and it kind of caught my interest. But Target had this a fashion designer named Lily Pulitzer, and she had passed away a few years ago, apparently, and she had a line of goods that she had designed, and Target had those, and apparently these are normally really expensive, but Target had them and was able to sell them for a lot cheaper than you normally could. And it was sort of a dedication and everything like that. So there was a big rush in Target. They actually had their websites. They had what they said was they had to take them offline for a couple of periods throughout the day when this sale began, because they just couldn't keep up with the demand. So things like that can happen where there's extra demand, and all of a sudden you need a lot more computing power, and how do you really deliver that? And one of the things that Microsoft Azure has is the ability to kind of spin up extra virtual machines on demand. When that demand starts to increase, they look at number of hits on the website, processing on the virtual servers, things like that, and they can spin up extra virtual machines that kind of share the load. So things like that are things that we have to start thinking about now. It's not the old, we've got a server and we need more memory in the server, let's just shut the server down and add more memory. Now we can start thinking of, we need some more virtual machines that can do this computing power for our databases, and put them into the mix. So thinking about that stuff, on premises you can do kind of the same thing I'm talking about here. So on premise, there's System Center, Microsoft System Center. You can run, it's called Virtual Machine Manager, and do some of the same type of things where you can add virtual machines in just as a kind of a utility. So you've got to need an extra virtual machine, you throw it into the mix, it can add in. You can also do things like clustering your host servers. So like I said before, you can make one physical host server in a virtual environment. You can make those redundant for each other. So you can have two or more. You can have a large cluster of host servers if you want to, but basically every host server can take over the load which is running the virtual machines for any of the other host servers. So you can start thinking about clustering those servers together, and you can update one set of servers at a time and not bring your virtual machines down, so your data is always accessible even while those host servers are updating, which, and if you spread out the application between different virtual servers, you can do the same thing there. So there's a lot of things like that to start taking into account. Now, if you do this on premises, of course, everything costs money. And the more we start to think of this, you start to think about adding in physical servers. You start to think about adding processing power and more drive space for another virtual server. There's, it starts to add up. So that's where, the public cloud can come in and make it a lot easier to handle. So Microsoft can take, they've got the deep pocketbooks. They spent something like $15 billion on their data centers for Azure. And their data centers run things like Hotmail and Xbox Live and Skype. Basically every online service that Microsoft provides runs in these data centers. So they've got, I forget exactly how it is, but it's just a huge amount of redundancy just in the network, in the physical servers that I was talking about clustering together. They have just big giant modules which are physical servers. You might have a couple of hundred of these physical servers in a clustered environment, and they just plug these modules in to add space. And they can do this because they have those deep pocketbooks, and they're investing in kind of the model for the future. So and again, when I say the public cloud, it still is. It still means private. It's still your data. It's not that you are putting your data out there where anybody can get at it. You still control your data out there. So moving on here. So we're kind of coming up. We're talking this through and looking for NAV specifically. What are the things that make Microsoft Azure so powerful if you're running NAV, and some of the reasons why you might want to put it in there. And one of the main reasons is, I kind of mentioned the redundancy and resiliency and everything that Microsoft can put into their data centers to run the workloads and make sure that things stay up and running. And other reasons are, these systems are very complicated right now. And I'm not sure what the mix of people is on this call, but the IT folks themselves, they'll tell you that it's a complicated system. Business leaders, they don't want to hear about how complex it is. They just want access to the data. And it really comes down to a choice of, can you afford to, do you have a desire to go through the pain and the complexity and keeping things up and running in-house in your own data center? You want to maintain SQL. You want to make sure everything is properly indexed, backed up, all the maintenance plans are running properly, and making the databases more efficient. You want to do that kind of thing. Backups and backup testing. You want to make sure that time is scheduled and that you've got time to test those things out and make sure everything is up and running. And it's kind of funny, the training piece. It's a constant struggle in the IT field today. Things are changing so quickly, and even more quickly than they have in the last 5 years. Microsoft is talking about yearly updates for their software, major releases on a year-to-year basis. That never used to happen, and it's all the speed of change is increasing, and trying to keep up with that is a real challenge. So there's that to think about. There's the redundant infrastructure in-house, and I'm talking there about your network, your switches, your firewalls, your routers, everything that comprises that network. You want to make redundant. You want to be able to have a switch go down and not take the whole thing down, which it can be a huge pain if you lose a switch. So it's taking that stuff into effect, and you can do all this stuff on premise. There's no doubt you can do all this stuff. It's just so complicated, and when it gets complex, it gets more expensive. So, and another thing to kind of keep in mind is generally, if you're in-house, you're running things on premises, you're going to have probably a main data center, and you may have remote sites, and if your primary links to those remote sites go down, all of a sudden your remote sites can't connect to your main data center, it can't connect to your applications, it can't log into NAV. There's big issues there. And you can design, of course, redundancy in the connections. You can have, more than one connection to your remote sites. You can have, site-to-site VPN backup across the internet. There's all kinds of ways to make that data still accessible. But again, all that costs money. So it all adds up, I guess, on premise is the idea. And you can make it as redundant as you want to, as much as you want to spend the money to do it. So another reason is data security. And sort of a misconception is that, well, I put my data up in Microsoft. Microsoft's a big target. That means my data is a big target. And that's kind of true to some extent, but at the same time, Microsoft has these gigantic data centers. They have monitoring on their internet connections. They have security set up on their internet connections. your data is actually more secure based on, you know, the hardware and the configurations up there and the constant monitoring of those firewalls than it would be on premise, because there's so much to keep up with. You know, even a single, you know, single IT administrator, a team of IT administrators, they can't be watching it around the clock. And I know there are, you know, automated processes, and there's signature updates for intrusion prevention and things like that. But, you know, like I said, Microsoft has these huge data centers. They have these huge internet connections coming in and constant monitoring on these connections as well. So, so I think from my perspective, it's definitely actually more secure in Azure. Another thing that they do up there is they take your data, your virtual machines, or whatever your data set is, how you have it up there, and they configure, they're called storage accounts, but basically you configure the storage and how you want to store your data, whether it's a virtual machine image or if it's a database or, you know, just a set of files, whatever it is. You can configure redundancy across geographic bounds. So my Azure data centers are set up in pairs. So there'll be like a West US and an East US. And if you have data in East US, you can configure and then it's basically a default where your data in the East US will replicate automatically to the West US. So any changes you make are replicated over. And even more than that, within the same data center, they actually will keep 3 copies of your data just for redundancy too. So those pods that I sort of mentioned before, where there's a bunch of servers together, those pods act as sort of a unit. And if your data is in one of those units and that unit has a problem, then you would be without your data as well. So they take the data and they, you know, replicate it between different sets of those clustered servers, so that your data is also redundant within the same data center. So they make a lot they take a lot of steps to keep your data spread around so that you have a single issue in a single location. It's not going to affect everyone. Because honestly, if they have an issue and they have a major outage, that's, you know, nobody would want to go up there. And Microsoft sees this as, you know, to be honest, it's a huge source of income for them if they have everybody having their servers up in Azure. That's honestly, you know, it's what they want, but they also want to be able to deliver a good product back to their customers. So another reason that you would put NAV in Azure, upfront costs would be reduced. And what I mean by that is basically if you're doing something on premises, you're going to replace servers, you're obviously going to have to spend some money to put new servers in. In a virtual environment, basically you can just add new virtual machines in and kind of scale out that way. Right, so deploying to Azure, and depending on how, you know, what sort of deployment you pick will sort of dictate how much money is saved to start out with. So just kind of a quick run through here of the different Azure deployments. There's infrastructure as a service, and this basically means that there are virtual machines that you can control, you can log into just like they're on your own local network. You can remote desktop in. Then there's platform as a service, generally not going to be used. It's more for software developers and their own custom applications. So I'm not really going to talk about this. And then finally, software as a service. And software as a service basically means that you get a login screen to your application, you get access to your data, and that's really all you need to worry about taking care of. So that model basically means everything from the hardware to the virtual machine to the the application version, that's all managed by your partner. And basically you get your data, you get your access, you don't have to worry about the rest of it. Okay, so moving on. So the infrastructure as a service, the IaaS, the IaaS, is one type of deployment. Generally what you would need this for is if you have like an application that requires domain authentication today. Right now the only way to do that is for it to be able to talk to your domain controllers, you know, talk to your local network, everything that you, for security that you do now. If you have an application that requires that, then you're going to need to have infrastructure as a service. So you have the virtual machines, you can join those to your domain, you can have it act just like another server in your domain. And then basically what you get is Microsoft Azure becomes one of your remote sites. So you have a connection to Microsoft Azure, you can run your virtual machines there, they can talk to your local network across a VPN connection, or there's a feature called Express Route, which is basically a high-speed WAN connection, wide area network connection between Azure and your local site as well. And that's available through several carriers and Microsoft. So basically, if you have an ISV, say add-on to NAV, that requires, you know, local access to your network through a domain for authentication, then you might need this. And of course, you get more control over your VMs because you're going to have to take care of those VMs. Cons, the biggest con probably is that it's going to be most likely the most expensive. And the reason for that is because you treat it just like a remote site. So you have virtual machines that you need to run. Those virtual machines are going to be a domain controller. So you can talk to your domain. You'd want to do best practice and have a domain controller there. You also want to have you know, access to files there if you need to, things like that. So it's going to be more expensive because you have to put up more virtual machines. Now, what Microsoft's long-term goal, I believe, is to have the domain, the authentication piece, move to more of an internet-based authentication. So there's something called Azure Active Directory that acts a lot like Active Directory. So the piece that requires a domain controller will start to move more and more towards internet authentication, which is still secure. Even though it's going across the internet, it's locked down, it's encrypted, all the traffic back and forth. But basically, you will reduce the need to have an on-premise domain controller, and in your IaaS, you can sort of start to migrate to a software as a service or another model, or completely replace your on-premise with something up in the cloud. So that's the direction things are moving. The other option for deploying NAV in Azure is the SAS model, software as a service. Basically, what you get here is you get you get access to your data, your software, the background, the site SQL server, and data on the back end. It's all taken care of. It's all clustered. It's all made redundant, resilient on the back end, and you don't have to worry about that piece. So basically, you get what you get is you pay for a user account that can log into NAV. You get your own database, and you pay a monthly cost per user. And there's a monthly cost for maintenance, monthly cost for access, and that's basically what you get. Some of the cons are it's less customizable because you have to have basically your backend, your SQL, and your NAV service tiers. They basically have to share the code base. So the version of SQL has to be shared. The version of the NAV executables themselves, those have to be shared. Although you can have it so your NAV executables don't run on the same server as another customer's, but you can actually have the same couple of people, a couple of companies on the same set of servers, because really you're just delivering the data. The software doesn't talk back and forth, so it still remains separated, but can still deliver the same set of logins, the same set of data to a separate customer. And there are some potential limitations for reporting, depending on how reporting might be set up in your environment. If you have any custom reporting, there can be some limitations. Just something you kind of have to look at on a one-off basis. And if there's questions on anything like that, please feel free to ask. Right, so of course it's not all rosy. There are certain things that you might have right now that would prevent you from putting NAV in Azure. One of those things is you don't have a reliable set of connections at your site, or don't have access to them. I would always recommend at least 2 connections between your site and any other site, whether that's Azure or a remote site of yours. So if one of your links goes down, then you still have access over the other links. So definitely recommend at least 2 connections. If you have an add-on that requires high bandwidth or low latency connection to your site. So these are kind of less common. And if you have ExpressRoute, which is the high speed you can get up to, I think it's even 10 gig connections to Windows Azure for a price, of course, but you can basically overcome this as well. You have an add-on that's not compatible with virtualization. Like I said, software is being developed more and more to be mobile, but sometimes it's not as mobile as it should be. And certain add-ons, not everyone moves at the same speed for development. So there are some that you kind of have to look at and make sure that they're going to be compatible with the cloud. And again, like I said, non-typical data access. So certain reports or certain types of access that you're trying to do anything customized, may not be compatible, but generally if it can communicate over a network, then it should be fine. Finally, you have to have a supported version of NAV. So 2013 or 2015 can be put up in the cloud as well. So we wanted to go through and kind of sort of ask some questions. What might hold people back from wanting to look at the cloud or look at running their data in a hosted environment. So one of those we thought maybe is cost. So we wanted to kind of go through and go through a price, kind of take a look at the cheapest way that somebody could replace their on-premise servers and kind of compare that to if they did it on-premise versus a hybrid type environment, the infrastructure as a service, or software as a service type model. So we ran through some numbers here just to kind of show this is with a single server on-premise running virtual machines. I myself wouldn't recommend this because you're going to have a single server, physical server. If that goes down, all your virtuals go down too. So I definitely would recommend spreading that across separate physical hardware. So this price obviously would go up. But we're trying to look at the cheapest way to put something in place where you can run your virtual servers as well and get access to NAV here. So kind of a list here. You've got your upfront pricing, roughly maybe $27,000, picking some numbers out. Ongoing annual type service would be, you got to pay for your backups. You got to pay for, say, if you wanted to do Azure Site Recovery to get your data off-site and have the ability to spin it up in the cloud, or move to a different site as well, and have some automation of your failover to a backup site. That's what this piece would be for. So that stuff can add up to networking equipment, UPS, if you're replacing or doing maintenance on those. Paying for service to back to that previous slide, service for maintenance on the machines. You got to pay people to keep them up to date and keep them running. So there's ongoing, and then there's ongoing monthly fees as well for say Azure Site Recovery, or power cost. For a typical server, roughly a couple $100 a month. And then wanted to kind of put some numbers together for a hybrid type environment. And again, as I mentioned, in a hybrid environment, you have to have more than a single virtual machine running. You're going to need your database server, your service tiers, your domain controller. You're going to need to pay for a VPN connection up to Azure or ExpressRoute, things like that. So just kind of some numbers there as well. This also assumes you're going to have something on-premise that you're going to have to pay for as well. And finally, the software as a service type model. And basically what you have for software as a service is you've got a provisioning fee per user, and you've got your ongoing monthly charge per user. And that can include extra backups. It can include, depending how you do this, and these numbers aren't going to be exact, depending on what add-ons you add in. But basically, the upshot to this is that there's going to be some upfront costs for provisioning users and migrating the database, things like that. But then you just switch to a monthly fee. And you don't have to worry about hardware replacement. You don't have to worry about hardware maintenance, antivirus, all the stuff that you pay for now on premise. You don't have to worry about when it's in a software as a service model. So just kind of some graphs for the cash flow. Like I said, there's a provisioning fee for the software as a service, and it kind of flattens out into a kind of a flat line here, straight across. We've got a hybrid environment here, which is basically your on-premise plus your hosting environment. So you're going to see some spikes. You replace your servers every 4 years or so. That's kind of what you'll see is you see a big spike, and then it'll flatten out. Big spike a few years later, flatten out. And that's both for hardware and service. All right, so total cost of ownership, like I said, it's going to be more for hybrid because you're adding both on-premise and in the cloud. But basically what Microsoft's trying to do is get it so you can actually eventually replace the on-premise with cloud, and that basically can start to come back down years out. So things to think about there. So other things that we wanted to go through for things that might be holding you back. So one is maybe loss of control. Maybe you're worried about who's got access to the data, or maybe you have worries of something changing, you need more access at a later point. So you can kind of decide up front, how much control you give up. If you give up almost none, where you have an IaaS situation where you can get access to the virtual machine, or do you give up a lot of it with the software as a service? So there's, you kind of can control that piece. And as far as access to data, Microsoft has a Microsoft Azure Trust Center. It's a good resource if you want to go and look and see exactly what sort of privacy and other security type of things they have out there. Anyway, I just grabbed a couple of these just kind of show what their overall view is on things, and you can go to this Trust Center as well and bring that up and go into more detail. But basically, your data is your data out there, and they're not going to be going through your data. Other companies can't access your data. So I'd encourage you to go take a look at the Trust Center and read up on that as well. So what else might be holding you back? So what if you try it and it doesn't work, and you don't like the experience, or you're worried about that part of it? Microsoft has a view that once people make the switch, once they make the move, they're going to get more benefits than drawbacks. But they still make it so if you say you want to test, or say you want to try it out for a little bit and you want to switch back, they make it so if you're in an IaaS situation, virtual machines, those virtual machines are the exact same virtual machines as would run on-premise. So you can move those back to your local network and just spin them up on your local physical host. And this might be good for testing before you put things into production. You can spin up a copy of your virtual machine, test things out, test and upgrade, make sure it works, and then put it into production locally as well. In the SAS model, the data is accessible. You can basically, if you decided you needed to move it to an IaaS situation or back on premise, you can certainly just do SQL backups and restores, which is how you would move to a new server at this point right now. So as long as you've got your your NAV installed and your same SQL versions, you can just do an export and import and carry on. So for making the move, one thing that we would recommend, we've been working with Azure in the cloud for years now. If you want to kind of dip your toe in the water, things you could do is hosted exchange to Office 365 is a big one. It's an easy way to move your mail, see how that cloud experience is, how redundant it is, and go from there. Backups, Azure Site Recovery. Get your data off-site and get it to the cloud, so it's accessible, and if there's a disaster local, you have access to your data still. Test drive the latest version of NAV is a good one. You can spin up a demo database. You can take your database if you want, spin up a copy of your database in 2015, NAV 2015, and give it a try. Or a test environment is a good idea too. You can certainly have a test environment out there, and test changes, test anything you want basically out there, and then not worry about it affecting your local on-premise, your production stuff that you might have on-premise. Also, it's definitely good to kind of assess where you're at and take a look at your your on-premise stuff. Make sure that it's going to fit in Azure. Like I said, there are some things that won't work. If you're unsure, please reach out, and we definitely can take a look at it for you and help you through that decision-making process. We've got companies that we moved entirely to the cloud. We've got companies that we moved NAV to the cloud. We've got companies that we moved partial things to the cloud as well. So chances are we've seen it, and your situation isn't unique, and there are ways to accomplish what you want to accomplish. So with that, I'll stop talking here. I appreciate everyone's patience with me. I don't do webinars a lot, and I'm an engineer, and obviously my slides aren't very well designed. I think the best slides that you've seen here probably I stole from somebody else. So again, thanks for your time, and if you have any questions, please put them in the chat window, and we're happy, Chad and myself, to respond.
That was a great presentation, Tony. So far, we don't have any questions. We'll give it a couple minutes just so people can kind of digest and start typing. I also want to remind everyone that if you want to review this presentation, or you want somebody else in your organization to be able to see it, we will have a recording up by the end of the day on our website. Of course, that's abc-computers.com. We have an entire recorded webinar section, so you can view any of our past webinars, review them, show them to other people in your organization. And Tony, we don't have any questions. It looks like you were so concise that there are no questions right now.
Okay. Well, again, thanks everybody for your patience and your time, and if you have any questions that you want to take offline, please feel free to reach out, and we'll do our best to help you out.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.